to the Pro Bono Happy Hour. I'm Rena Glazer. Welcome back. Today's guest is Stephanie Schlatter from Buckley Sandler. Stephanie is based in Washington, D.C., and we discussed her interesting background, career, and experiences directing an emerging law firm pro bono program. We hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi, Stephanie. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invite. I appreciate it.
Let's jump right in. So to start, could you tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, where you went to school?
I'm an Army brat, so when people ask me where I'm from, I say nowhere or everywhere, depending on how I feel that day. My dad was in the Army, so we've lived overseas, all over the U.S., and when it came time to go to undergrad, my parents were going to Japan, and so I did undergrad in Alabama at Jacksonville State, and then came back to D.C., worked for a couple of years, and then went to grad school and got a master's in education and taught high school and coached for 6 years. And the principal that had hired me was leaving, and I decided that if I was ever going to go to law school that I needed to go, and so I did. I went to Western New England in Springfield, Mass., and then came back to D.C.
So this is a lot to unpack before we move on. So do you think, or how do you think being in a military family influenced your personality, your sort of life track? I think you hear from a lot of people that it builds resilience and adaptability and a certain flexibility. I don't know, what do you think it instilled in you?
I think it definitely makes you more resilient. I find it pretty easy to be dropped into new places or new environments and being able to make friends quickly, kind of make my way around. I'm not sure that I believed that when my dad said we were moving our senior year of high school. I have a twin brother, so I keep saying our senior year of high school. I was pretty angry at the time, but having gone to undergrad in what would be a small community, people who grew up in the same place, didn't travel, didn't go anywhere, they thought that I was very odd, that that I was picking up so quickly. So I definitely think it's a benefit for military kids because they do assimilate pretty fast.
So if you can get over bitterness and incredible
That's
resentment, right. But kids are always hating something.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
If it's not one thing, it's something else. So okay, Jacksonville State. 2 notes on that. One, you may not know, but I grew up in Alabama.
Really?
Yes.
Oh,
absolutely.
wow.
So I feel an affinity for that experience
that
you
great.
had. Yeah. We could talk about that maybe offline. But also, as we were talking before we started recording, this is a big time for Jacksonville State. And I'll say we're recording this on March 16th. March Madness is just getting started, right? First game's being played today. So listeners, by the time you listen, you will know how this turns out. But this is an epic time for Jacksonville State, right?
Yes, they are invited to the dance for the first time, having won the Ohio Valley Conference, which many people were shocked that they were anywhere close. So I'm very excited. People at least get to hear their name. And of course, I've done a bracket that picks them going all the way, and you just never know.
So let's see. Maybe they're this year's Cinderella. Stay tuned.
Right.
Very exciting, very exciting. And one note about Springfield, Massachusetts, home of the Basketball Hall of Fame.
That's
so
right.
This oddly seems to be a very appropriate March Madness themed episode. It is actually the hometown of our founder, Esther Lardent. She grew up in Springfield, Massachusetts. When her family resettled in the United States, they had a cousin who was already there, and they made their way, and that's where she grew up.
Oh, so that's great. And Dr. Seuss is from Springfield, Mass. Also.
A lot of connections.
Yeah.
So I also went to summer camp not that far from there. So Springfield was like a solid escape, right, to like an actual restaurant or a mall, or more importantly, air conditioning.
Yes.
So, wow, so many connections. Okay, let's circle back to why you became a lawyer. What were your goals? What were your interests? What were your motivating factors?
It probably sounds hokey to some people, but I think the first book that I actually remember being interested in and caring about was To Kill a Mockingbird and Atticus, and it being based in Alabama as well, I think had a personal connection. And so I knew that I always wanted to go to law school. I think at times you kind of question, am I smart enough? Is it too hard? You know, that's an awful lot of money. And I think that's probably why I went to grad school first, because I also did have an interest in teaching. My mom's a teacher. And so when I was teaching government, I was teaching constitutional law in the government class. And so when everything kind of came together at the same time, I decided that if I was going to do it, I needed to do it then.
Well, we love To Kill a Mockingbird. I think when we first started, we do pro bono summer reading recommendations, right? And I think it was one of the first books that we recommended. Obvious choice, but classics are amazing. And I bet when people ask you, students, young people, you know, whether to go to law school, what advice do you have? I'm sure you, sort of like me, now come to tell people, well, just be sure. You know, maybe when I was coming up, it was a nice default for people who didn't want to go to medical school. They didn't have a science background. You're like, okay, I'll just stay in school, I'll go to law school. But the economics now are so different that even, you know, just from a purely financial position, you really should be sure that this is what you want to do. And, you know, if your heart is really to be a counselor, that's a different path. You know, maybe you don't need a JD, right? If you want to pursue, you know, sort of an education path, a social worker path, be really clear about what it is you want to do. And that's hard to say that you know your life goals. That's what no one does. And we're going to have a lot of different jobs and careers. But it's a bigger commitment, you know, than it sort of used to be, and not just in time and sweat equity, and, you know, emotionally, Yeah,
and I think it makes for a different type of law student. I remember very early on, I'm vocal. If I have the wrong answer, that's fine with me. I'm paying to get the right answers. And so, you know, a lot of the people I was in law school with were in their 20s. I was almost 40, and a guy came up to me after class one day. He said, "You really don't care if you get the answer right or wrong, do you?" I said, "No." And I said that, you know, he said, "I would be so embarrassed if I was wrong." And I said, "Well, you're 15 years younger than me, and you'll get over that eventually." But that's because I in fact, to this day, am still in touch with most of my students. And when they would ask about, you know, law school or graduate school, I said, you know, my biggest advice to them was that they should work after undergrad, doing anything, any type of professional job, to then decide, is this what I really want to do? I said, because if I had gone straight from undergrad, I don't know that it would have meant the same thing to me.
It's good advice. I'm sure they've changed the name. When I was in law school, we had a group, and it was older, wiser law students. And the Owls, I'm sure.
That's great.
I'm sure they have changed their name. But I really appreciated the Owls, who I got to hang with, because they had such great perspective. You know, when you're young and all you know is being a student, you just get worked up about things.
Right.
And not just grades, not just exams. In law school, I mean, there's a lot of pressure. And it's weird because you're used to having midterms and papers and a lot of feedback. And for a lot of classes, all you have is one exam.
Right.
Like, you know, that's it. It's pretty high stakes. But you also get worked up about the job search, right? And sort of the whole kind of machine of that. And I think the Owls had a really good perspective of, we'll get jobs.
Right.
There's not just one perfect job out there for you.
Yeah.
You know, and also people who've been professional students don't realize what a good gig being a student is.
Right.
Right? I mean, you have so little responsibility, really, and it's so self-indulgent. I mean, it is all about you to learn and to grow and to make the most of it. And if you want to work out and stay up late, if you want to sleep in and stay up, you know, you're not kind of a 9 to 5, you know, sort of you have a lot of freedom, and you can fool around, or you can be disciplined, you could treat it as a job, you know, you can just take it in a lot of different directions, but it's up to you. And I think they had a really good perspective of, you know, the real world
Yeah.
isn't nearly as fun or laid back or indulgent. So appreciate all the upsides of this.
Yeah. Well, because I came out in '07 and there weren't any jobs.
Yeah.
And, coming from the education arena, I had no idea how difficult it was going to be. I had heard, but I thought, well, that's just talk. And I had no contacts in the legal field. And, so I was like, fine, then I'll go back to teaching, or I'll temp, or, work contract work. And again, a lot of the younger people were waiting for that firm job with the big salary, and that didn't materialize, and they found out very quickly they had to do something else.
I think that's one thing now, being like old, having the perspective of time, is you really do see that there isn't one path. And there are a lot of great experiences people have. And I think the legal profession in general has changed, where like professions in general, everywhere, it's rare now that you'll have one job your whole career, right? And then retire, get the gold watch, and just kind of move off into the sunset. The mobility, kind of whether we like it or not, whether we're nesters or not, whether we think there should be more loyalty, both ways, it's just kind of the world we live in.
Yeah.
And in Washington, where we are right now, both of us and speaking, that's been true for a long time, with the ethic of government and public service and people serving in various, sort of government capacities or public interest capacities, and then doing private practice and kind of moving around. And that's always been sort of respected and value added, not some net negative. And I think people are seeing that, particularly in a global world where people want to move around or for family reasons, as you've mentioned, they're sort of moving around, and it's just an interesting time with a lot of options on the table. So flashing forward a little bit, how did you get to Buckley Sandler?
Well, I was working as a contract attorney, 60, 70 hours a week, and I'm involved in a lot of outside organizations, and one of those organizations, I was on the board, and they had periodic happy hours, and a lady showed up, and I introduced myself, and she was new to town. I introduced her to a lot of people, and as she was leaving, she said, if you ever need anything, let me know. And I said, well, I'm looking for a job, and so we exchanged cards, and she followed up a couple of months later, and they were the firm where I am, Buckley Sandler, was hiring temporary staff attorneys. And so she said, are you interested? And I thought, well, sure, why, it's what I'm doing right now. It's still contracting. And that then turned into a permanent job, and then the rest is history.
That's amazing. So for all you people that doubt networking, network and just get up your courage, just get it. What's the worst that happens is someone's like, excuse me, walks away and doesn't come back. Okay, fine.
Well, and that's what everyone that I talk to, that's coming out of either undergrad, grad school, law school, I said networking is a skill, and it's scary. And I said, but if you're looking for a job, especially in a city like DC, you have to tell everyone you're looking. Don't ask them, can they get you a job? You show interest in what they do, whether you're interested in it or not. And they will know someone, and eventually it'll work out, and it just...
get on people's radar screens.
Right.
And that was interesting because it was a live interaction, right, at an event. I will say, I think this is where technology smooths some of the rough edges, because I think email helps, people, particularly alumni, through alumni networks, schools, or connections. I get this a lot, and I'm always happy to talk to people. And email, you can kind of respond when it's convenient, and it's not that scary. And if no one responds, okay, you can always think it went into their spam filter. So, it's not you, it's them, and it's okay. But I think people like to be helpful, but you have to be willing to make the ask, and you have to put yourself out there and say, I am on the market, so keep me in mind,
And drink a lot of coffee, even if you don't drink coffee.
And as you said, have reasonable expectations. I mean, everything isn't transactional, like, I'll babysit, will you get me a job? That's a little uncomfortable, but people will think of you, and that's a great story. So tell us a little bit about the firm. it's young and emerging and growing, and then we'll talk about its pro bono program.
Sure. The firm was originally a boutique, about 30 or 35 attorneys. It was Buckley Sandler. I guess it's been 8 years now. A group from Skadden left, who they had all worked in the same arena for a number of years and decided that they wanted to make a change, and so the firm merged, and it's now Buckley Sandler. We're in the financial services arena. We also have a white-collar practice. A number of people came from Mayor Brown, so it's a good combination of people who were at Big Law and for whatever reason decided that Buckley Sandler was where they wanted to be, and we've grown steadily. A lot of work with the banks, with mortgages, with credit. A lot of the emerging technologies are starting to kind of shift our focus a little bit. But I think the advantage of being at a smaller firm is you can kind of take what worked or didn't work at the big firms and adjust accordingly. And that's kind of what's happened with the pro bono program.
So at a certain point in time, I'm not exactly sure, so you'll explain this to us, you became the firm's pro bono coordinator. So there's got to be a story there. How did that come about?
The story probably starts with I'm a pushy broad.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, that's great.
And so I was a staff attorney, and they didn't have a coordinator. They had kind of a loose committee, and another staff attorney had gone to Joe Kohler, our pro bono partner, and said, Stephanie's very good at everything, and you should put her in charge. And of course, he thought she was kidding, and she never stopped saying that. And so I guess it was probably, I had been there about a year and a half, and they said, oh, would you like to join the committee? And maybe you can kind of do some of the administrative work. And so I was doing 100% billable and starting to kind of coordinate the program and stepping into some of the organizations that worked with legal services. And then it became a lot more pro bono work, and I said I cannot continue to do 100% billable because the expectations are that that's always first, rightfully so, because that pays the bills. And so after about 2 years, I worked 50% billable, 50% pro bono. And because the program was growing and more people were doing work and more people wanted to do work, it was again pulling away from the billable time. And so then the firm made a decision to let me do that 100%. And so I've been doing that now for about 2 years at 100%.
That's a great arc. And you had a great line last week at our conference about, people who are sort of half billable or half pro bono or some combination of having a billable practice and some combination, and you try and think maybe it's half and half, but really it ends up being full and full.
Right.
Because it is sort of 2 full-time jobs.
That's right. Well, you think about it from the billable perspective. You've got a partner who has a client, and they say, we have this many attorneys doing this number of hours. And that has to happen regardless of what's happening with the pro bono cases. And if something blows up with one of those, you have to also give 100% of your attention there. And, I think it's a struggle for smaller firms, bigger firms not so much. But I was very thankful that the firm realized that because we were doing more work and that it was good work and attorneys were getting experience that they otherwise wouldn't get, that they made the commitment to it.
Yeah, and it is a big commitment, sort of bottom line, to go from sort of a revenue producer to, sort of a...
That's right.
Not, but...
That's right.
But as we'll talk about, to make the program really work, to sort of embody the values, you need some help there.
Right.
And so it's important, and I think the firm should be applauded. It's a really big and serious step.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, it's sort of... firms that aren't the mega firms, having infrastructure, it's just different. The sort of levels of professional staffing, non-lawyer staffing, but sort of admin or, non-revenue generating professional staffing. It's a different calculus in sort of the needs and the depth and the breadth. So it's amazing. So how has your life changed since you went from, let's say, fake half and half, which was full and full, to sort of 100% pro bono?
It's a lot more administrative work, a lot more meetings, and trying to figure out how to get people involved, understanding that my motivation is not everyone's motivation, and that's okay. Realizing that no now isn't no always, and learning how to get people involved that previously have not been involved. That's a different calculus than just strictly billable work, and thinking about one client.
So we talked about meetings, we talked about administrative tasks. Is there anything that you wish you could be doing more of if you just had sort of more time? There's always things on our to-do list that we never seem to get to.
Yeah, I think on a personal level, I would like to be able to take more cases. I tried to do that, and it always seemed that it doesn't work out. When I was teaching, a couple of my classes every year were team taught classes with special ed, and so I have a background with special ed law. And the second summer of law school, I worked in Alabama, in Tuscaloosa, with ADAP, and worked on their special education team doing advocacy. And so that kind of is a love of mine. And so I would take on more special ed cases. I would probably take on more constitutional law cases, First Amendment law. But I think, we've grown very quickly with the program, and so I think at some point there's going to be some leveling out where things will kind of run themselves a little bit, and hopefully I'll be able to do that.
That's a common theme. I think listeners will recognize this. The administration and my responsibilities for running the program take up all of my time.
Yes.
So my own pro bono docket, sort of suffers because I would be back to like multiple full-time jobs. I mean, I don't have the capacity for that, and that is a choice that I need to make. And in a way, it's a generous choice, because for many people, the selfish choice is like, I want to work on the stuff that I care about, and so I don't fill out forms on time, or things slip through the crack, or I take a few less meetings. But that's not in the program's best interest. So I think it's a tension that people feel, and it's not wholly uncommon, and it does, I'm sure, change over time, and ebbs and flows. So we talked a little bit about some of your pro bono challenges. So what have you found works best to incentivize and encourage your lawyers to do pro bono?
Well, I think early on we realized, again, some people will think it's silly, but giving some sort of recognition, awards, we have done since I've been involved, an end of the year celebration, and given little tchotchkes to people who did a certain number of hours. And again, because the firm is supportive of the work, we have it structured where if you do X number of hours, you get the little award that sits on your desk. And then if you do more than that, you get a dinner with some of the partners. And then if you do what is a lot of pro bono hours, our foundation supports it with a $500 donation in the person's name to the organization of their choice. And so for a lot of people, I think that's important, that other people recognize that they're doing this work. And we've also not ever said no to what someone is interested in. Now, we may have to adjust it a little bit. One of our requirements is that our cases come through a legal service provider. We don't just take stuff out from the general public. And we do that for a lot of reasons, mostly because it's usually work that we don't do on a regular basis and have no experience with, associate level or partner level. And so we look for organizations that have a good training, that have staff attorneys or mentors for the people doing the work, so that if they have questions, they can go to them, and we're not kind of left floundering. And so, when someone says, this is what I'm interested in, or this is, what I care about, part of my job is to find the organization that matches with that and give them the options. So, I think the fact that we let people name what they want to do and not just tell them what they have to do is a good incentive for a lot of people.
I think that's a great point. We talk a lot about pro bono being where passion meets purpose, and I think people want to care about what they're working on in their pro bono matters, and that takes legwork, and that's where you are a real value add. But it's true as an incentive. You know, if you're kind of legislating and saying we do X and Y, and you're like, well, that's great, but I'm not particularly moved by X and Y. You're sort of limiting yourself and self-limiting. But it also makes great sense to work through known legal services providers for all of the reasons that you talked about. And more, I think it makes your job not easy, but easier. Because when you're dealing just with cold calls and people bringing in my neighbor, you know, that becomes really hard to manage. And we can just be like, no, this is kind of our protocol, and here are the objective reasons why we need that. And I'm ready and able to go out and nurture additional relationships, but this is the system that we have. And I think that's smart.
Well, and I think in a city like D.C. or any other big city, you know, the legal services organizations know where the need is, and I would not presume to say this is where we need to be working, because I don't have that information. And, you know, I think it's easy for people to focus on big impact, sexy cases, and knowing that the legal services organizations understand that there are what we would call bread and butter cases that have to be done every single day. And, you know, they may not be in the news or whatever, but, you know, I think that's a benefit to us is, you know, they kind of vet the cases. They know where the need is.
That's another wonderful point. I put this under worst practice. We talk a lot about best practices, but, you know, there have been a number of times where firms have sort of worked backwards. They had their idea for a project, and then they went out and they sort of built it, but then there was no need. Right? There were no clients. There was actually no pipeline of actual work because it was an idea, but not a need. And you sort of have to start with those providers in the trenches, right? That know the communities, know populations, know poverty law issues that, you know, many of us aren't doing full time. We're not necessarily the experts, and work that way as opposed to the other way around. That's sort of a worse practice where you can really create something and then there's no there and it sort of goes away. So great points all around. Let's talk a little bit about the firm's pro bono docket. Could you give us some examples of the types of providers you work with, the types of matters that you do, a little bit of the range, and then we'll talk about matters that have been particularly meaningful for you.
Sure. Like I said, we don't say no to anything that anyone's interested in, so we have a number of immigration matters, whether they're visa cases or some of the special juvenile immigrants. And those, I think, really tug at the heartstrings because those are kids who've come across the border unaccompanied. We have some significant matters that have been going on for a number of years. One in particular that deals with a gentleman, again, who has special needs and was in prison and treated pretty horribly. You know, so for that, I kind of said yes before we did any kind of conflicts check. And so that, you know, as far as impact litigation, but, you know, we do a lot of wills through the Legal Counsel for the Elderly. You know, you don't think about that elderly people need a will. And if you're low income, you don't just go hire a lawyer to write it for you. And I think that's a way for people who have a very limited amount of time. They still want to meet a client, and they're doing something that's necessary. We do some special ed work. I've got a case going on right now. A lot of the work is more advocacy than it is litigation, especially like in the special ed arena, because these are parents who just don't know the lingo or the process, and so you're really helping them walk through the process and letting the school know that someone's watching. We've done some criminal appeals in Maryland, kind of runs the gamut.
Yeah. I also like that you have a wide variety of subject matter, as we talked about, and time commitments, because I think that's important too. Basically being able to combat any people's resistance. Right? Like, oh, I'm so busy. I don't know. So, okay, let's start small. Right? You are not too busy for this. You can make a big difference in a not big amount of time. And we can make this work. So.
Yeah, I can give you a 10-hour will, or I can give you a 400-hour impact litigation. So.
And everything in between.
Yes.
So don't say no. I have answers to all of your objections. I also like your perspective, given the education background, that a lot of what we can do is inform and educate people to advocate for themselves, right? I think sometimes we don't realize as lawyers sort of power that we have, right? People don't even all the time know that what they have is a legal problem. They just know they have a problem. Right. Is it a school problem, an education problem, a health problem, a housing problem, a benefits problem? Yes, but a lot of these have legal solutions.
Exactly.
And we're lawyers, we get it, right?
Yeah.
But people need information.
Yeah.
And that's a big value add in helping them navigate bureaucratic, complicated, overly difficult, unfriendly, scary, challenging systems.
Yeah. Well, and that's what my second summer when I worked for ADAP, the Alabama Disabilities Advocacy Program, they had a consent decree with the state that was dealing with children in the foster care system. And it turned out that in working through that consent decree, a lot of those students also had special ed needs. The foster parents had no experience with that, and so that's how we got in and took the matters, but we were doing the special ed advocacy and explaining to them, this is what IEP means, and this is when the clock starts running, and this is what the school has to do. And so you're looking at children, again, who are not in their actual home. They are being taken care of by someone else. So they're already at a disadvantage, and to think that they have special ed needs that are not being met, again, it is mostly advocacy, just telling them this is the process and this is what's supposed to happen.
Let's explain briefly for people what an IEP is.
It's an individual education plan, and so when a student is not making progress for whatever reason, the school should be testing, or a parent can request for testing, and they may determine that the kid is dyslexic, or they have some sort of learning disability that needs to be addressed. And so the school gets the teachers, the special ed people together, the parents. The student's not usually in that meeting, but they know what's going on, and they say, okay, we're going to do some one-on-one work from time to time, or we're going to read the test instead of have them try to read the test themselves. We're going to read it orally and let them answer orally. And so making it very individualized education for them.
And it's a problem in school districts around the country that do not honor and enforce this right that people and families are entitled to. So it's actually a pretty big area of pro bono practice now to try and keep feet to the fire and make sure that students and families are getting what they are entitled to. So could you share another story or two of a meaningful pro bono matter that you've either worked on or that the firm, you've sort of enabled or witnessed?
Well, I think right now the impact litigation with the gentleman that was in prison in Virginia, there's some questions in my mind whether he should have ever been in jail for anything, but that's the way it happened. And knowing that, he has limited abilities, is autistic, and so his reactions to situations are not the same as everyone else at times, and that the state and the locality did not take that into consideration, and knowing that he's been in a situation in prison that is heartbreaking. And for us to take on a matter that big, especially as a small firm, one is a big commitment of time, a commitment of resources. And, I'm sure someone else eventually would have helped him. I don't know that for sure. And knowing that his mother is very thankful, he's thankful, and that at some point maybe the prisons will change their approach, because I'm sure he's not the only one. So for me, that's an important. But we also have, children that are coming across the border unaccompanied, and reuniting them with their family, going through the process of going through family court, and then getting them asylum based on their status. I have a soft spot for those.
Nice. So it's interesting, as you were telling these stories, the first word that popped into my head was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But now I'm encouraged and inspired. So I think it's a good testament to that. I want to switch gears and take a little detour to community service land. And to back up for a minute, I have been saving this. So you're going to think I'm a hoarder.
No, that's fine. I am a hoarder.
But I actually don't like clutter, but I really wanted to talk to you about this. So thank you for sending it. What we're looking at, and this is riveting on a podcast, I'm sure, it is a season's greetings card, and we will put out pictures of it on Facebook, and maybe we'll tweet some photos. So follow us. We're at Pro Bono Inst. And it's a greeting card that the firm put out, holiday greetings, season's greetings, and it references their community partnership, which we can talk a little bit about. And the artwork for the card was created by a 5th grader, Leah D. And the back of the card has pictures from their other 5 finalists, people ranging from kindergarten to 4th grade. Mm-hmm. And I love it. It's such a great use and tie-in to the firm's community service initiatives. Okay, switching gears a little bit from pro bono, but just to talk about community service. And a great way to highlight the values of the firm in an awesome card that you're probably going to do anyway, right?
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about the community partnership and how this card came about.
The partnership is through the Washington Lawyers Committee that has an education program where they partner law firms with DC Public Schools, and so we have partnered with Cleveland Elementary for a number of years, doing tutoring and a lot of different things with them. And so I just happened to notice we send out these very generic, boring holiday cards, and
no slight intent.
Exactly, exactly. So we worked with the art teacher. They did their own contests, have parameters that are always not always followed. Then we give the partners at one of their lunches in November the options, and they decide which ones they like. And we've actually moved from doing just the hard copy card to also doing our email card the same way. And one of our marketing guys is super tech savvy and animates the card. So like that one, the snow was coming down in the snow globe, and the fire started, and you could see the flames. And so that
all of this will make more sense when you look at the photo, but you can have an image in your mind of a snow globe with the snowman and a roaring fire, which also makes sense given that it snowed here on the East Coast this week. Crazy.
Yeah. So it is a good combination, and I think, I'm sure other firms do the same thing, but I think for us, the overlap of the pro bono program, the community service, our foundation, they all are kind of woven, and even our green team are all woven together. And the idea that we support what people are interested in, whether it's in a community service activity or pro bono activity, I think they all work together very well.
I like to think that a rising tide lifts all boats, and that works well to integrate those values and functions. And I've got to think, a lot of this is about creating and benefiting the firm by creating more engagement among your people, feeling good about the firm, loyalty, all of that has business benefits. And I've got to think versus getting and sending the generic but lovely card and something that is as touching and meaningful and just kind of makes you smile and feel good is just night and day. So that's really great. So thank you for talking to me about that. Switching gears a little bit, back to pro bono.
Okay.
What's on the horizon? What do you have in the works? Short-term, long-term goals, new initiatives?
Well, in the last year and a half, we have moved from having kind of a limit on hours that counted for billable. I, again, being a little bit pushy, have the partnership has agreed to do 1-for-1, which I think is huge, just to really not just say we're committed, to actually show that we're committed. And we have It's not a requirement, but our goal is that every attorney will do 30 hours or more for this year. Last year it was 20, and we went from 40 some odd percent to 73% doing 20 hours or more, which was huge, at least in my mind. And then this year we did something new, which was actually pick an area of the law that we wanted to focus on, and that was immigration, and boy, we're focused on it. So
yep.
That was picked before everything happened, and now it's coming around full circle.
Your crystal ball was effective,
right.
So there you go. Well, I love to see the positive momentum and movement, and as a relatively new signatory to our Law Firm Pro Bono Challenge, we love that. I think many times firms are just resistant, right? We're kind of not where we want to be, so we're going to wait till we get all our ducks in a row. Don't wait. I mean, you will never get all your ducks in a row, right? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Just let's go. Right. We got to start somewhere, and there's help out there for you. And it's a really great story of progress due to amazing commitment and hard work.
Thank you.
It doesn't happen overnight, so it's really a testament. So, okay, if you had a magic wand, what one thing would you change about the firm's pro bono program?
I think in my perfect world, it would be mandatory. I think there's a little bit of movement from the bar associations to make pro bono mandatory, and I get the arguments that could be seen as a negative, that people don't want to be forced into doing something. But as we've talked about, there's so many options. I really can't imagine that there's not something that someone cares about. So I think I would make it mandatory, but we obviously can't help everyone. But I think continuing to grow and continue to increase the number of hours and seeing where that leads us.
Excellent, thank you. So let's end with this.
Okay.
Who's your pro bono role model?
I thought about this, and I think selfishly there's several different answers.
Yeah, good.
Going back to Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus, obviously, taking a case during a time that probably was not the best for him. I think that showed the commitment that is needed, especially in the pro bono arena. But going back to our discussion of networking, when I was still doing contracting and meeting people, I was put in touch with, you go to a coffee, and the rule is, make sure that they give you the names of 3 other people. And so the first or second person that I had coffee with was Jess Rosenbaum, and she put me in touch with Jim Sandman and Phil Horton, who didn't know me. They both were still at AMP and had busy billable practices and running AMP's pro bono program, which I can't even imagine doing.
So that's Arnold and Porter, which is now Arnold and Porter Case Scholler, right? Yeah, for people who don't think it's the supermarket.
Right.
It's not the supermarket.
Yeah. I'm sure people don't know the AMP was a supermarket.
No.
Like the Piggly Wiggly. And so, both of them spent a lot more time than I would have ever anticipated that they would. Phil took me to lunch, paid for lunch, talked to me for almost 2 hours, and I was just so impressed that a partner at this huge law firm would spend the time to kind of help me navigate an area that I had no experience in. And knowing that they both were so committed to pro bono, I think spoke volumes for them.
Oh, thank you for sharing. That is such a great note to end on, because generosity of spirit is something we could all use a lot of these days. So knowing it's available is very validating.
Yeah. And Phil came and spoke at our end of year program this year, and everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, he's wonderful." I said, "I told you so."
Yeah, and he's quite a character.
Yes.
So he's a great speaker, and that is awesome. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much to Stephanie for her time and sharing her expertise with us. New and archived episodes of the podcast can be found on iTunes and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and please take a moment to leave an iTunes review. It's quick and easy to do. We'd appreciate the feedback, and it would help make it easier for other listeners to find the show. and expand the conversation about pro bono and access to justice. To learn more about us, you can find us on the web at probonoinst.org. We'd love to hear from you. Send your comments, feedback, and suggestions to probono@probonoinst.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Pro Bono Happy Hour.